It's July 1518 in the city of Strasbourg. You're in the street, and a woman named Frau Trophea steps outside her house and starts to dance. No music, no celebration, nothing to dance to. She just starts moving and she doesn't stop. Not after an hour, not after a day. By the end of the first week, she's still going, feet bleeding through her shoes, and somehow she is still dancing. Within a month, more than 400 people in the city are doing the exact same thing. And some of them are dying. Not from anything else, from dancing. This isn't a legend. It isn't a myth someone made up centuries later. It's one of the best documented medical mysteries in European history, and to this day, nobody knows exactly what caused it. Let's start with what we actually know happened, because the details are stranger than any explanation for them. Frau Trophea danced for somewhere between 4 and 6 days straight before authorities intervened. City records, physician notes, and cathedral sermon logs from that summer all describe the same event happening in the same place, which is part of why historians take this so seriously. This isn't one unreliable diary. It's a paper trail from multiple independent sources in the same city at the same time. Within a week of Frau Trophea starting, roughly 36 more people joined her. By the end of the month, estimates from city physicians and clergy put the number at over 400. And here's the detail that makes this so unsettling. These people weren't dancing because they wanted to. Witnesses described them as looking exhausted, terrified, even in pain, but unable to stop. Some were reportedly screaming for help while their bodies kept moving. This wasn't a party. It was closer to a seizure that lasted for days, and people started dying. Historical estimates suggest as many as 15 people per day were dying at the peak of the outbreak, mostly from heart attacks, strokes, and complete physical exhaustion. Imagine dancing non-stop for a week in the middle of summer with no rest and no water break. The human body simply cannot sustain that. Something has to give, and for a lot of these people, what gave was their heart. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. The city's response made everything worse. Strasbourg's physicians at the time believed in a medical theory involving what they called hot blood. The idea that this affliction was a physical imbalance that needed to be danced out of the body, not suppressed. So instead of stopping the dancing, the city officials did the opposite. They cleared out a guild hall. They built a wooden stage in the grain market. They hired musicians, actual professional drummers and pipers, to play continuously. Their logic was that if people danced it out completely, with rhythm and structure, they'd recover faster. It didn't work. If anything, the constant music and the sight of a public stage seems to have pulled more people in. Historian John Waller, who has spent years researching this event in depth, argues the visual spectacle itself may have triggered new cases, people seeing others dance uncontrollably and then losing control themselves. Whether that's exactly what happened or not, the outbreak didn't slow down until the city abandoned the music theory entirely and instead sent the afflicted to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a saint linked in local belief to a curse that caused compulsive dancing. Only after that pilgrimage does the outbreak seem to fade from the historical record. So what actually caused hundreds of people in the same city to dance themselves toward death? The most famous theory is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, and it produces compounds chemically similar to LSD. Medieval Europe had documented outbreaks of ergotism before, and it can cause convulsions, spasms, and hallucinations. Strasbourg sits in a river valley, exactly the kind of damp environment where ergot-infected grain could show up in the food supply. It's a compelling theory on the surface, but there's a problem. Ergotism typically damages fine motor control. It causes people to convulse, to lose the ability to walk properly. Sometimes it even leads to gangrene in the extremities from restricted blood flow. What Strasbourg's residents were doing wasn't uncoordinated convulsing. Multiple accounts describe rhythmic, sustained dancing for days, sometimes with a kind of physical coordination that doesn't match ergot poisoning's actual symptoms. If it really was ergotism, the dancers should have been collapsing and twitching, not dancing continuously in a way witnesses could actually describe as dancing. The theory that has the most support today is something called mass psychogenic illness. And 1518 in Strasbourg gives us almost a perfect setup for it. The years leading up to the outbreak were brutal. Famine had struck the region after a string of failed harvests. Smallpox and syphilis were both spreading through the population. Strasbourg was also dealing with heavy taxation and religious anxiety tied to the era's obsession with divine punishment. People genuinely believed disasters like this were signs of God's wrath. And there was a specific local legend tied to Saint Vitus, that he could curse people with compulsive dancing if they angered him. Put those pieces together. A population under extreme psychological stress, primed by religious belief to expect a dancing curse as a form of divine punishment. In a culture where public, ritualized episodes of religious ecstasy weren't unheard of. Historians studying this event point to something called a stress-induced dissociative trance state. where extreme anxiety produces uncontrollable physical symptoms that spread through a community almost like a form of social contagion. Once one person starts in an environment already primed to expect it, more people follow, not out of choice, but because their nervous systems are responding to the same collective stress and cultural expectation. And this wasn't even the first time this had happened in that region. Historical records describe similar dancing outbreaks along the Rhine, going back over a century earlier, in 1374, spreading through towns including Aachen and Cologne, with the same pattern. Sudden onset, no music required to start, spreading person to person, and eventually fading out. This wasn't a one-time fluke. It was a recognized recurring phenomenon in that specific region, tied to a specific cultural and religious context. Here's what makes this genuinely fascinating instead of just strange. Mass psychogenic illness isn't a medieval relic. It still happens today. There are documented modern cases of sudden, unexplained physical symptoms spreading through schools, factories, and communities under stress, with no toxin, no virus, and no clear physical cause ever found. The body can produce very real, very physical symptoms in response to psychological stress. And those symptoms can spread through a group the same way an idea or a rumor spreads, through observation, expectation, and shared belief. So the people of Strasbourg in 1518 weren't cursed, they weren't poisoned, at least probably not. What they were, most likely, was a population pushed to a genuine breaking point, primed by belief and by fear, and the body found the only outlet it had left. For some of them, it was the last thing their body ever did. And maybe that's the real reason this story has survived 5 centuries. Not because a dancing curse is a good story, but because it's a reminder that the line between the mind and the body is a lot thinner than we like to think it is.